So, are you going to be replaced by a machine? Is AI going to make your job obsolete? We live in a society that is very keen on technology. When Apple releases a new iPhone, there's a line outside days in advance. So we've come to love technology, yet there's many who say that in it lie the seeds of our destruction, that all we hold dear is threatened by technology. Now, this is not a new idea. In 1811, in Nottingham, a group of stockingers, those are people who knit stockings, they started smashing knitting machines and burning mills. And they published some of their grievances under the name of their fictitious founder, Ned Ludd. So we know them as the Luddites. And in fact, their key success was getting a word in the dictionary, the Luddites. Now, it wasn't a brand new thing. In 1788, Parliament passed the Protection of Stocking Frames Act. The stocking frame was the particular kind of knitting machine they were mad about. And it had very severe penalties. Ultimately, that was increased to the death penalty. And quite a few Luddites were hanged, others were imprisoned, but tragically, the majority were forced to become Australian. Now, in that era, the Luddites were afraid for their own jobs. They knitted stockings, and they were afraid these machines would make them redundant, as you'd say here. Since that point, a whole variety of other folks have been worried in the same way. Almost continuously since 1911, there have been people who had the same thought. These days, it's actually changed a bit because instead of people worrying about their own jobs, the folks who say this now are intellectuals and economists and various pundits. They're not worried about their own jobs, they're worried about somebody else's jobs. So this went from an obsession of the working class to the chattering class. Now, if you ask, well, why are we even talking about this now? It's because you can't open a newspaper or read a news feed on your shiny new phone without reading that mass unemployment will be unleashed by artificial intelligence or robots or self-driving cars. A widely reported study from Oxford University said that 47% of the American labor market would be eliminated in the next 16 years. A German study said it would be 10% of their jobs in 5 years. The MIT Tech Review, of all places, ran an article called How Technology Destroys Jobs. Now, if they really believed that, they should have just shut the place down. Now, I have a name for this idea. I call it the innovation menace. It's the notion that adoption of a new technology will cause mass unemployment, social upheaval, and all sorts of harms. H.L. Mencken once very memorably defined Puritanism as the haunting fear that somewhere, someone was having fun. Along similar lines, the innovation menace is the haunting fear that somewhere, someone might have a good idea. And heaven forbid they might actually use that idea to try to make the world a better place. Now, it turns out Nottinghamshire in the 19th century was not a cesspit of unemployment. Quite the contrary. It became the ground zero for the Industrial Revolution. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Lucas likes to say that the Industrial Revolution was marked primarily by one thing, that the living standards of the working class steadily rose in real terms year on year for 50 years. That was unprecedented before that time. So the Luddites got it wrong. Now, at the same time, it's not that the 19th century was a happy place. We have Wellington looking very stern over there, looking down on us. The Napoleonic Wars were going on the same time the Luddites were complaining. Shortly after that, there was the Irish potato famine. Shortly after that, there was the American Civil War. Millions of people died or were displaced by these tragedies. Were any of them because of technology adoption? No. In fact, the Civil War was almost the opposite. It was about the most reactionary thing. It was about using humans as slaves, using humans as machines, as it were. And that brings me to my first main point about this innovation menace. Throughout the centuries, it's been proposed many, many times, and it's always been wrong. Every last time, you can't find an instance of enormous societal upheaval that was caused by the adoption of a new technology. Now, that leads to a question, though. If it's always been wrong, why do people keep bringing it up? The answer can be found in the title of a book about the 2008 financial crisis, although it applies to many more things than just that. The book was called "This Time is Different." See, everyone who invokes the innovation menace is convinced that, oh yes, of course, those old things were wrong, and isn't it quaint that the Luddites were mad about stocking frames? Ha ha ha. But now, uniquely in human history, now it's different. And I better, ring the alarm bell. Unfortunately, in fact, another characteristic of people who do this is almost the first things they say is, I'm not a Luddite. But after a little bit of throat clearing and chest thumping to that effect, they proceed to make the identical errors that the Luddites made. And I gotta say, I grade them a little more harshly today than I did the Luddites back then. So let's look at a couple examples. I was invited here by the Worshipful Company of World Traders. Well, if you looked 40 years ago, 1978, the trading of securities, and I'll take the New York Stock Exchange because I have those statistics, it was a very healthy thing. They were selling 29 million shares a day on average. Crazy system. You'd call up your broker and say, I want to sell. They'd call the people near the exchange. The order would be written on little slips of paper. Message boys would run it down to men wearing loud colored jackets shouting at each other. But, it sort of worked. Now, you could look at that and say, oh, my God, computers will take all of those jobs. In addition, this was the same year in the 1980s that deregulation of these markets happened. Here in the UK, you called it the Big Bang. And in fact, computers did take over most of that. Commission rates dropped to near zero. Most retail customers pay nothing or a flat fee for doing their trades. So, should we pity the city? Is this the point that we should protect Bloomberg terminals like they were stocking frames and send those who desecrate them off to Australia? No, I don't think so. The financial industry has never been stronger. Dame Fiona read us some of the statistics of the fintech industry here, and besides fintech as a category, the financial industry is vastly larger. The reason that that wasn't a catastrophe is that all aspects of the financial business changed, including the number of transactions. Today, the New York Stock Exchange processes more than 1 billion shares a day. Now, if you said that was going to happen in 1978, people would have said, no way! Look, first of all, there's not enough little pieces of paper. The guys with the loud jackets can't shout loud enough. It's just not going to work. But even if you assume all those problems away, how would people make that many investment decisions? Why, they'd have to be making thousands, tens of thousands of decisions a second. Yes, indeed. Most of that volume is computers selling shares to other computers. On behalf of people, to be sure, but by focusing only on the harm, on looking at one part of the system, you ignore the rest of the system changes. Another recent example is something called the digital divide. In the 1990s, when the internet started becoming prominent, people went from not being sure why you'd want to have a computer at home to thinking, wow, this is really great. And about like a nanosecond after someone said, wow, this is really great, it was like, okay, so now we have a problem. You tech people are going to make the gap between rich and poor wider. You're going to create inequity. It's the digital divide. We'll have the digital haves and the digital have-nots. Now, on the face of it, it was absurd because any technology takes time to go through society. Cost is one factor, but there are many others. Take indoor plumbing. It took a long time for that to work out. But computer technology drops in price faster than essentially anything in human history. Plus, the tech companies that were coming into being to realize the potential of the internet, they had every incentive to connect as many people as possible. Google would sell more ads that way. So in fact, the digital divide basically was a non-event. Now, I'm sure there are people in the UK who don't have internet access who want it or should be given it. That's true in the United States. Internationally, if you look at the developing world, there are plenty of places around the world that don't have internet access that should. But again, the technology moves so fast, that's going to be fixed. A very ambitious company called OneWeb has a plan to connect every schoolroom on Earth to the internet by 2022. Now, that's a pretty remarkable thing. Even if they're off by a few years, that will be a faster transition than almost any technology you can think of. Now, you may notice that I'm being a little bit more hardcore about this than most folks. The usual thing a tech guy like me says about all of this gloom and doom with technology is they say, well, you know, I'm an optimist, I don't believe that'll be true, but you know, they raise important points, and we need to consider that. And that's code words for, I don't believe a word of it, but I don't feel like sticking my neck out, so I'm gonna, and I think enough is enough on that, so I am sticking my neck out a bit, because I think it gives people a very inaccurate view of the future for a couple of very specific reasons. And I have to say the tech industry is in part to blame for this. When I worked as the chief technology officer at Microsoft, people would interview me and they'd want to know my vision for the future. What I quickly learned is there's two different things you could do. You could give a vision of the future that I thought was highly likely to happen. Or you could give a really bold one that was just a pipe dream. They always wanted the pipe dream. And I would try to be very dutiful and say, well, here's what I really think is going to happen. They'll say, but the guy at the other company, he said we'd all be in flying cars by next Thursday. And because we are always focused on the new in technology, there's no downside to promising everything. You could spout off and be this fabulous visionary. I was the boring one. And yet, there would be no feedback cycle to say, you know, everything this guy said is wrong. The other issue with tech culpability is that people in tech companies love to say that their technology is disrupting a giant industry, that it will roll through everything, that it will annihilate the competition. Because those are the things you say to get your stock price up. And when you say all those things, it gives people the notion that, wow, technology must always get deployed right away. Well, sometimes it does, but usually that's only when there's been lots of work up front. So when Nokia was the #1 cell phone company on Earth, and they didn't transition to smartphones, but Apple did, well, that was an easy thing to substitute. It took many, many years for the cell phone industry to get up to that point. Similarly, if you were a Yahoo user, you could become disenchanted and start using Google or some other service without a capital investment, without lots of training. You'd click. So self-driving cars are a technology that's not like that, and it's worth discussing because self-driving cars have a whole set of innovation menace stories around them. They're going to drive truck drivers into unemployment. One study actually argued that it would cause 30% unemployment in the United States. The Great Depression was 25, so that'd be pretty bad. Now, the thing about the self-driving car industry is that it's a $0 billion business, at least if you sell the cars. If you sell stock in a company that says you're going to make the cars, that's a different deal. That's a multi-billion-dollar business. And actually, this is a key point. The innovation menace becomes most convincing for things that don't exist. It's very simple. Once self-driving cars are on the market, we're going to say, yeah, but they don't go very fast. Yeah, but they're really expensive. But before they exist, you can paint a picture of them being perfect. Oh my God, they do a perfect job. They're cost effective. And in fact, all of the most extreme examples of this innovation menace are focused on things that don't actually exist. It happens yesterday. I was in Naples, and I got into a discussion about self-driving cars with the man who was driving me around. And we were in the middle of crazy rush hour traffic in Naples, and the guy laughs and he says, cars that drive themselves, let's see them handle Napoli. He had a point. But even if we say, hey, the technology is going to work and it could figure that out, it can't be a fast transition. The median age of cars on the road is 12 to 15 years, depending on the country. So that means it takes 12 to 15 years to replace half of the cars. Well, we built all of our car companies and their factories for that. No matter how fast they pump out cars, our existing factories can only replace 4 or 5% of the cars every year. And it's slightly disturbed by the fact that actually a lot of cars go to places like China, where they're brand new markets they're not replacing. So the numbers for replacement are lower. So even if there was a thing where tomorrow you could get self-driving cars, it would be many years before they're a large phenomenon. And over that period of time, the truck drivers or taxi drivers or whomever are going to have a lot of opportunity to switch to something else. But what else are they going to do? I don't know, and I'm okay with that. One aspect of this innovation menace is to focus on the harm and not to think about what the rest of the system will do. So in an economy that is booming enough to replace its cars, the total value of cars on Earth, the replacement value, is probably $30 trillion. If we're turning those over real fast because we want to get that, there's a lot of money flowing around. I don't know exactly what those drivers will do, but that shouldn't be a prerequisite because I can't predict everything that's going on. Last year at the TED conference in Vancouver, I got into an argument with an MIT professor who is a big proponent of this innovation menace, oddly enough. And I put my arguments forward, and he says, but you can't prove that it'll work out. I said, well, you're right, I can't prove it, but it always has, and to bet against it is to bet against human nature. that in fact we're collectively not smart enough to move into other areas. You know, I don't know exactly what the Luddites that didn't go to Australia wound up doing, but in the booming economy of the 19th century Industrial Revolution, they almost certainly found jobs. The unemployment rate was very low. So trying to fixate on the harm without the rest of the system is a mistake. Now, let's turn now to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a software thing. It can happen in servers out in the cloud. It doesn't have any of this pesky physicality of a self-driving car where you have to manufacture the car. So it could happen sooner. And AI has therefore become a key focus for the innovation menace. Now, if you're like me, you've been around for a while, you realize that AI goes through a cycle of hype. And it's gone through 3 or 4 of these since the 1950s when it started. Initially, people get, hey, this might be possible. And that goes to a crescendo of, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. And then it crashes because it's a disappointment. During the phase when it's very high, any technology that you want to be called cool, you say, it's got AI in it. During the phase when it's not cool, even if it really is AI, you pretend it's something else. And I think the most useful analogy here is to look at another area where, I should say, the reason people are afraid of AI is you say, well, what if computers are smarter than we are? Whoa, what will that do? Well, let's look at an area where computers are smarter than we are, mathematics. Computers can tally up a list of numbers way faster than anybody in this room can. Billions of times a second. Now, for a long time, computers have been used for numerical calculation, but now I don't mean the machines. Computer was a job title, just like stockinger was. The first use of this job title in a document is in 1613. We needed mathematical tables, particularly for navigation. You had to make these very complicated navigational tables, also tables of logarithms. And it was done by a whole bunch of human beings who would sit in a room with pencil and paper and do the calculations. Now, unbelievably, this practice continued all the way up into the 1960s. In fact, 2 years ago, there was a great film called Hidden Figures, which traces the career of Katherine Johnson. She was an African-American woman who was a human computer who worked at NASA doing calculations that computers couldn't do for the early space program. Of course, since the 1960s, our computers have gotten literally 1 billion times faster. So, of course, NASA fired all of those people, right? Actually not. We changed their job title. We call them programmers now, or computational physicists, or mathematicians that do numerical analysis. You see, math isn't a single problem. It's not just adding up columns of numbers. There's more advanced math, and that more advanced math requires more computational capability. In fact, we know from theory that there are some math problems that are so difficult, we'll never solve them, at least with today's computers, maybe a quantum computer. So, and in between the ones that are impossible and the ones that are trivial is most problems. So if you're at NASA, or you're an engineering company, or you're a fintech company, you employ lots of people who effectively have the same job as those human computers, but a lot more of them. And that's because of a funny property of computing. Normally in economics, if you dramatically increase the supply, the demand becomes inelastic at some point, meaning you've got enough of that stuff. You know, if actually at the Olympics, the Norwegian team at the Winter Olympics, the chefs used Google Translate to order their materials to cook the meals for their athletes, and they accidentally ordered 15,000 eggs. Oops. So because there is this range of different problems within math, we're never actually going to be done. Now, the analogy to artificial intelligence is there's a big range of problems there too. And the likelihood that is all solved by one thing seems quite remote to me. So let's look at what some of the current commercial applications of AI are. Well, a couple months ago, I was doing research for my next cookbook. I write cookbooks. And I ordered a whole pile of books on pizza from the Amazon.com in Italy. And American Express promptly shut off my credit card. But to be more exact, an artificial intelligence at Amex. Because one of the first real commercial applications of AI was in building neural networks that would look for weird patterns, like a guy in Seattle suddenly spending a lot of money in Italy. Now, that was a very useful application. And if you look at applications of artificial intelligence in Wikipedia, for example, you'll see more. But it's a truly modest list. And it's not a list that really put anyone out of work. In fact, I argue that Amex, using this neural network fraud detection, actually created a lot of human jobs. I say that because to get my card turned on, I had to go call up a human and beg them to turn it on. Meanwhile, they didn't used to have a bunch of people checking every transaction. So in fact, the AI being imperfect gives a bunch of people in customer service a job. Now, more recently, there's been some very impressive announcements about research breakthroughs in AI. Google created the world's largest neural network. They called it Google Brain. And it learned to recognize cats in YouTube videos. It's actually a hard problem. We'll talk about that in a moment. Another unit of Google recently announced that they'd created a program that learned to play Go, the Asian strategy game, sort of very hard game. Now, those are both really impressive. Frankly, the cats is slightly more impressive to me. You see, the game of Go, like chess, like mathematics, those are the things computers have actually been the best at taking over from us. And those are all things that are really hard for human beings. We all struggled in school with math tests. Those people who are chess grandmasters or masters of the game of Go, they work for years to get there. Those things have been those are the hardest things for us. Computers, it's not been easy, but we've gotten computers there. The more difficult thing is stuff like recognizing cats, things that you didn't have to be trained to do. It just sort of comes naturally to us. Now, it sounds like I'm making fun of them to say, oh, recognizing cats. My company developed a non-invasive test for cervical cancer, which uses AI image recognition technology analogous to that. And it outperforms human pathologists. So it is way better and way faster and way less invasive than any other test. Now, in Britain or in the United States, that will save some lives and that will save some costs in the healthcare system. But the reason we did it is for the developing world, where it's not a question of saving cost on a lab test. There isn't a lab. There isn't the expertise. You're not beating a human. You're beating nothing. And technology like this has the ability to save millions of people. So I'm very bullish on AI. But I think realistically, it's going to be a transition from here to the point that computers are super smart that will take many decades. I personally think we need a few new concepts. Every now and then we'll learn an important new thing about how the brain works. And science is punctuated by these points, the Newton's laws, or the theory of evolution, or the general theory or special theory of relativity by Einstein. We need a couple of those, in my view, to make computers as smart as people. It could be it already happened today and we'll read about it tomorrow morning, or it could be it'll take us 50 years. I don't know. I do think we'll get there. Now, finally, that takes us to the notion that artificial intelligence might threaten our very existence. There are a variety of people who have speculated about this publicly. Just in the last couple of weeks, a tech industry executive texted that AI was more dangerous to society than nuclear weapons. Now, that's so absurd, I almost don't know where to start. Nuclear weapons have only been used twice, thankfully. In those two attacks, they killed somewhere between 130,000 and 250,000 people. We don't know because they were vaporized, literally. The survivors' stories are beyond hellish. And since that time, we've made them thousands of times more powerful and created thousands of them. Now, that's a very clear and present danger. So over here we have the horror of nuclear war, and over on the other side, we have cat videos, go, and turning off my credit card. So how could smart people say these things? And I thought about this for a while, and I decided it was very much like me saying that the Norse god Loki is a greater danger to humanity than nuclear weapons. Now, that's absurd because Loki doesn't exist. But if you watch the movies, the Marvel superhero movies, what you discover is Loki is a supernatural being with godlike powers who's intent on destroying Earth. And if that's your postulate, if you come to this saying, well, AI has godlike powers and it's intent on destroying Earth, well, sure, that's a bad combination. It's a good combination for a superhero movie, of course, because the plucky hero always saves you in the end. But it's in making that assumption up front that you have effectively all of the content. And if you don't like Loki, I could say, well, Sauron has one ring to rule us all. Or winter is coming, and the Night King and his army of dead people and White Walkers are going to take us all. We create these fictional scenarios because there's drama to us in the notion that there are godlike powers that humans have to defeat to save Earth. Well, if you go down the line, I don't think any of these things reasonably apply to AI. The powers are not godlike. The AI at Amex didn't figure out that those pizza books were actually going to the same address I send all my books. So what's the big deal? And there's plenty of other examples of that sort, number one. Number two, it's not like artificial intelligence has some unique ability to reach out of the computer and kill us. Now, I've had people say, well, okay, but if we put all of our nuclear weapons under their control, that's a bad idea, okay? Actually, nuclear weapons under anyone's control are a bad idea. But we haven't managed to create a world order where that's eliminated yet. But certainly, don't go putting your early stage software or even your later stage software in control of nuclear weapons. Please don't. In my business, when we say the system crashed, it's kind of a metaphor. But I think the biggest issue is, why would they hate us? You can concoct a strange story, just like all of these fictional cases do. But if you don't concoct a story like that, why should beings we created, for which we compete for nothing? I mean, normally humans fight with each other over what? Over land, over money, over prestige, you know, the crazy ambitions of their leader. That's what makes us fight. I don't see why we would compete with artificial intelligence for any of these things. But if it does come up, I say we give them Mars. It makes Elon mad because besides AI that'll destroy the world, he loves Mars. But Mars is a great place for machines because there's no oxygen in the atmosphere. They don't rust. Machines hate that. So I think it's dreadfully overdrawn to make the argument that AI will destroy us all. And frankly, the proposals to avoid that are even sillier. You know, avoiding research has essentially never been a good idea. Some people have called for government agencies to do that. Well, I don't know. After the 2008 financial crisis, it's hard to say, oh yeah, thank God those guys in the SEC were on the ball. Boy, oh boy. I mean, that might have been serious otherwise. So the idea that you have artificial intelligences with almost infinite intelligence and godlike powers, but are stopped by a government oversight committee just seems a little weird to me. Now, I was having a discussion about this with a very famous, brilliant man who said to me, but Nathan, aren't you just a little worried about a super intelligence? I looked at him, I said, well, you know, it is how the rest of us view you. And ultimately, my personal survival strategy is the same as it is with him. I'm really hoping they like me. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.